In the spring of 1288, a fleet of Yuan warships moved down a muddy river in northern Vietnam, trying to escape to the sea. The river was called Bach Dang, and at high tide it looked broad, deep, and safe. But beneath the brown water, men of Đại Việt had planted rows of sharpened wooden stakes, their iron-tipped heads hidden just below the surface. The Yuan commander thought he was chasing a weaker force toward the coast. In fact, he was being pulled into a trap built from mud, timber, and time. The hidden stakes rose from the water like teeth. Ships slammed onto them, hulls split, oars tangled, and the fleet that had crossed an empire suddenly could not move. Fire ships came with the current, arrows fell from both sides, and the trapped Yuan navy began to burn. This was not the beginning of the war. It was the end of the third invasion. 3 times, the Mongol-Yuan Empire had come for Đại Việt. 3 times, this small kingdom at the edge of the tropics refused to break. This is the story of how Đại Việt survived the armies of Kublai Khan, not by being stronger, but by making strength useless. To understand how impossible that victory seemed, you have to remember what the Mongols were in the 13th century. Within a few generations, Mongol armies had shattered kingdoms from northern China to Central Asia, from Persia to the edge of Europe. By the late 13th century, the most powerful man in that world was Kublai Khan. He had conquered the Song dynasty in China and founded the Yuan. A new empire ruled from the north but stretching deep into the old Chinese world. There were trade routes there, ports there, tribute states there, and a road toward the riches of Southeast Asia. Between the Yuan Empire and those warm southern seas stood a narrow, river-cut kingdom. Its name was Đại Việt. It was a wet country of rice fields, villages, mountains, tidal rivers, and a capital at Thăng Long, the city that would one day become Hanoi. Its rulers were the Tran dynasty, a family that understood boats, canals, court politics, and war. So the Vietnamese would learn to fight a different kind of war. The first test came in 1258, before Kublai had even finished the conquest of China. A Mongol force came down from Yunnan, crossing the mountains toward the Red River Plain. Their demand was simple: submit, open the road south, and join the empire's wars. The fighting was brutal and fast, and the Mongols pushed toward Thăng Long. But the Vietnamese court did something that stronger kingdoms often could not bring themselves to do. They gave up the capital. The royal family, officials, soldiers, and supplies withdrew before the Mongols could trap them. When the invaders entered Thăng Long, they found a city that could be occupied, but not used. Food was scarce, the heat was punishing, and the countryside around them was hostile. A cavalry army that lived by speed suddenly had to feed itself in a land of rivers and paddies. The Vietnamese struck back when the invaders were stretched and hungry. Within weeks, the Mongols withdrew. It had been denied the thing every invasion needs most: a way to stay alive. That lesson would become the heart of Đại Viet's survival. Nearly 30 years later, the empire returned. By 1285, Kublai Khan ruled all of China, and the Yuan could send a far larger army south. This time the invasion was part of a wider plan to control the region, including the kingdom of Champa farther down the coast. The pressure on Đại Việt was immense. Yuan columns advanced from the north, while forces connected to the southern campaign threatened from another direction. At the center of the Vietnamese defense stood a prince and general whose name would become legend. He was Trần Hưng Đạo. He understood that courage alone would not stop the Yuan. The invaders had to be made tired, hungry, uncertain, and far from safety. So once again, the court abandoned Thăng Long rather than let the capital become a cage. Villages hid food, boats moved people and supplies, and the army faded into country the Yuan could not easily control. The Yuan occupied the capital, Vietnamese forces retreated, and some nobles wavered. But occupation is not victory when the land around you refuses to feed you. As the Yuan line stretched, Đại Việt began to bite back. At Ham too, Vietnamese forces struck a Yuan detachment on the river. At Chuang Xuong, they attacked again, burning ships and cutting into the invaders' control of the waterways. The war turned from a conquest into a retreat. Yuan commanders who had expected submission now had to pull their exhausted army north. For the second time, Đại Việt had survived. But Kublai Khan was not finished. The third invasion came in 1287, and this time the Yuan tried to fix the problem that had ruined them before. They brought a massive supply fleet. If Đại Việt could not be fed from the land, the invaders would feed themselves from the sea. Armies moved by land, Fleets moved along the coast and rivers, and once again Thăng Long fell into Yuan hands. But the Vietnamese understood the same truth as before: the invasion was only as strong as its food. Near Van Don, the commander Tran Khan Zu attacked the Yuan supply ships. The result was catastrophic for the invaders. Stores of grain, weapons, and equipment were captured or destroyed before they could reach the main army. The Yuan still held the capital, but the capital could not feed them. Every day in Đại Việt now made them weaker. The heat, disease, ambushes, and empty granaries did what no wall could have done. They forced the greatest empire in Asia to think about leaving. One Yuan army would retreat by land. The fleet, commanded by Omar Nai, would withdraw through the rivers toward the sea. Trần Hưng Đạo knew where it had to pass. He chose Bạch Đằng. Bạch Đằng was not just a river. It was a tidal maze of channels, mudflats, reeds, and currents near the coast. Centuries earlier, Vietnamese forces had used this same river to destroy another invading fleet. Now Trần Hưng Đạo prepared to do it again. Workers drove sharpened stakes into the riverbed, hiding them beneath the high tide. Smaller Vietnamese boats harassed the Yuan fleet, then withdrew as if afraid. The Yuan ships followed them into the killing ground. Then the tide fell. The river that had seemed open became a cage of timber and mud. Stuck on the stakes, crowded together, the Yuan ships lost the one thing a fleet needs most: movement. Vietnamese forces attacked from the banks and from the water, setting ships ablaze and cutting down the trap crews. Omar Nai was captured, and much of the fleet was destroyed. On land, the remaining Yuan forces fought their way north through ambushes and hunger. The invasion was over. Kublai Khan had the power to order another campaign, but the empire never again conquered Đại Việt. The victories of Đại Việt were not miracles. They were the result of hard choices: abandoning cities, burning supplies, enduring fear, and waiting for the invader to become vulnerable. They were victories of rivers over cavalry, of logistics over numbers, of patience over force. Trần Hưng Đạo became the great hero of the story, and rightly so. But the deeper lesson is that Đại Việt survived because an entire society learned how not to fight the Mongol-Yuan Empire on its own terms. It refused the battle the invader wanted, and chose the war the invader could not win. That is why, in the long memory of Vietnam, Bạch Đằng is not just a battlefield. It is the place where the river itself seemed to remember. In the next video, we leave the rivers of Đại Việt and cross to the jungled mountains of Cambodia, where an entire medieval city lay hidden beneath the forest canopy until lasers began to reveal its streets. That's the story of Mahendraparvata, the buried city of the Khmer world. Subscribe so you don't miss it.